On January 6, 2021, a mob attacked the U.S. Capitol, attempting to stop Congress from certifying Joe Biden as the 46th President of the United States, convinced by false claims that the 2020 election was fraudulently stolen. During the riot, a writer for the New Yorker magazine, Luke Mogelson, caught a striking moment on video. As the rioters occupied the floor of the U.S. Senate, a lone Capitol police officer chided them.
Okay, just want to let you guys know, this is like the sacredest place.
I know, right?
This is like the sacredest place. He appealed to their sense of the sacred and the profane, labeling the floor of the Senate the sacredest place. He was not alone. In the aftermath of the attack, lawmakers repudiated the attackers with similar language.
This is a special place. This is a sacred place. But this sacred place was desecrated by a mob today.
To those who engaged in the gleeful desecration of this, our temple of democracy.
And it was not just Democratic lawmakers. The conservative writer Mario Loyola, writing for the National Review, said hallowed ground was violated today by an unspeakable sacrilege. Notice the language they're using. Desecrated, defiled, temple, hallowed ground, the sacredest place. This is unmistakably religious rhetoric, and this rhetoric can teach us something about American political culture, religion, and identity. In this episode, we'll examine the rhetoric following the January 6th attack on the Capitol as an example of American civil religion. In a famous essay on President Kennedy's inaugural address, the sociologist Robert Bellah argued that the United States has a civil religion. It's not Christianity, although it was deeply inspired by Protestant Christianity. It's not explicit, although we can find it everywhere. Bellah modeled it after a definition of religion put forth by the sociologist Emil Durkheim. Religion is a collection of beliefs, symbols, and rituals with respect to sacred things and institutionalized in a collectivity. Bellah argued that Americans enact American civil religion in ritualized performances like the Star-Spangled Banner, by printing ceremonial deism on their currency, and when they call objects like the American flag sacred. In the words of Bellah, all of this provides a religious dimension for the whole fabric of American life. Over the years, scholars have criticized the concept of American civil religion. Religion is a very loaded term, and labeling all of these American rituals and rhetoric under this one word, religion, might stretch the category so much so as to render the term completely meaningless. I get that, and I'm not trying to equate calling the Capitol sacred with huge cultural phenomena that we call Hinduism or Shinto or Islam. To equate those with American civic rituals and rhetoric would stretch the term religion too far. And some scholars, like the political scientist Roderick Hart, argue that we should call all of this civic piety instead of civic religion. But the point of American civil religion is not to argue that a new religion has emerged since the founding of the United States. The point is to use the lens of religious studies to make sense of a wide array of American behaviors so that we can better understand American culture. And in this case, the behavior we're examining is religious rhetoric in the political arena. This actually was the focus of Bellah's original article. Bellah examined JFK's inaugural address, the same address that gave us the iconic expression,
"Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country."
In this address, JFK mentioned God on 3 occasions. So what can we learn from this? Well, we could cynically dismiss his rhetoric as surface-level piety. We could say every president, especially in the 1960s, needed to pay lip service to God, otherwise they might lose votes in a Christian-majority country. But Bellah said no. We should not dismiss it as only a ritual. As Bellah says, what people say on solemn occasions need not be taken at face value, but it is often indicative of deep-seated values and commitments that are not made explicit in the course of everyday life. He argues that Kennedy's references to God revealed several assumptions about American ideals. First, Kennedy is making a claim of religious legitimacy of the highest political authority. His political power rests not just in the people, but with a higher authority, God. Kennedy was also making a claim that American rights are transcendent, coming not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God.
The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God.
In other words, Kennedy claimed our ideals are divinely inspired. They're preserved not through human effort, but, to quote the Declaration of Independence, they're endowed by our Creator. I would say this is also the implicit purpose behind stamping our currency with "In God We Trust," or saying "One Nation under God" in the pledge. All of this sounds very abstract, but American civil religion is anything but abstract. Ceremonial language and the ceremonies themselves aim to shape social and political behavior. For example, concession speeches and inaugural addresses, as rituals, institutionalize the peaceful transfer of power. It aims to shape collective behavior and identity to respect that transfer. So, what work is being done when people declared the Capitol as sacred? By labeling the legislative heart of the nation as sacred, lawmakers constructed a narrative that American democracy itself is transcendent, something that should be protected and honored. To quote Bellah again, "What people say on solemn occasions need not be taken at face value, but it's often indicative of deep-seated values and commitments that are not made explicit in the course of everyday life." Going off of that, these lawmakers do not necessarily believe that the Capitol is literally sacred. But since the peaceful transfer of power is usually taken for granted in the US, this sort of rhetoric aimed to make something explicit that often is implicit. It aimed to label the attack in terms that we can understand and encourage the behavior to respect the peaceful transfer of power. This rhetoric thus follows a long tradition of American civil religious performances that aim to label the Capitol and the American democratic process as sacred. Ever since George Washington laid the building's silver founding stone in 1793, the U.S. Capitol has been described as a religious building. Its first architect, William Thornton, based his design in part on the Pantheon in Paris, which was a church until the French Revolution secularized it in 1789. Thornton also incorporated characteristics from Greek and Roman temples. Most obvious are the Capitol's rows of Corinthian columns that support its east and west entrances. The Capitol's pediments, the triangular roof over its entry steps, intentionally resemble the Pantheon of ancient Rome, or the Parthenon of ancient Greece. These were intentional decisions to make it look like a temple. Thomas Jefferson, who designed his Monticello mansion along similar lines, wanted the Capitol's design to connect the dots between the new American Republic and the democracy of the ancient Greeks. In 1812, Jefferson called the Capitol the first temple dedicated to the sovereignty of the people, a very similar religious analogy that we heard from lawmakers following the January 6th attack. And then there's the Capitol's dome. The dome's lower interior is hung with paintings depicting mythologized scenes from the founding story of the United States, much the same way the interior of a church is often decorated with scenes of sacred stories from the Bible. Up above, the dome ceiling is covered in a fresco called the Apotheosis of Washington, a word that literally means to elevate something or someone to divine status. Washington sits saint-like, ascending to heaven on a cloud like some colonial-era Virgin Mary. So equating the Capitol with a sacred building was not invented out of thin air in the moment. But what about the rioters? Did they think they were desecrating sacred space? From their own rhetoric and rituals, it does not seem to be the case. According to reporting from the Washington Post, aides of Mitch McConnell, while barricaded inside an office, heard a woman outside praying for the evil of Congress to be brought to an end. A similar scene played out in the Senate chamber when Jake Angeli, the so-called QAnon shaman, referred to the chamber as sacred space and then led a prayer.
Let's all say a prayer in this sacred space.
These ritual behaviors suggest that at least some of the attackers were attempting to re-sanctify space that they believe was already desecrated. In the weeks after the attack, the scholar of American religion, Kerby, argued that for the rioters, and especially for the Christian nationalists among them, the Capitol had already been desecrated. According to them, it's been desecrated because there are people governing the country from that space who aren't enacting God's will, or the will of the people according to myths about election fraud. They were going in to turn the moneylenders out of the temple. This demonstrates how American civil religion is an empty signifier. In other words, it knows no party and excludes no religion. American civil religion is a source of power that can be wielded by anyone. And when it comes to the January 6th attack, if you believe in false claims about election fraud, one person's sacrilege is another person's act of sanctification. In the words of another scholar of American religion, Peter Manseau, the religious rhetoric, the religious symbols, the religious rituals of prayers of the rioters were used to legitimize their violence. Through these symbols, the rioters gave themselves permission to do what most Americans think was unthinkable. Because American civil religion itself is an empty signifier, it's we, the people, that get to fill it up with meaning. This is often done through rhetorical appeals like what we saw after January 6, but just as often it's done through song and ceremony, through monuments like Mount Rushmore, or through mottos printed on our currency. Just as the anthropologist Clifford Geertz predicted, these symbols and rituals create forces that move us. They generate an implicit and self-sustaining reality that produces concrete effects, such as court cases, election turnout, and social movements. As I said before, American civil religion might sound like abstract academic jargon, but it has concrete effects on American society. And American civil religion was part of the story before, during, and after January 6. This was episode 5 in an ongoing series on American civil religion. You can watch previous episodes about the American flag, the phrase "In God We Trust," as well as a general intro to the whole concept by clicking on the playlist here on screen. This is one of those topics that YouTube will probably label not suitable for ads, so please consider signing up for our Patreon community. It's the best way to enable me to make videos on more controversial topics like this. Depending on your membership level, you can get access to our Discord server, as well as monthly Q&A live streams with me, or even Religion for Breakfast mugs. So thanks everybody, and I hope to see you next time.